lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. I said to our staff, it was interesting. I picked up Psalm 13 and I opened it up and I began to read and I went, this is a great way to kick off the book of Psalms for the summer. How long, God? Why have you forgotten me? But before we kind of unpack that, I want to give us a reminder of what the Psalms are actually in their entirety about, and that's this. They are about Jesus, and we're going to draw this point out of the text is this. All things point to Jesus. All right, so last year when we were looking at the Psalms, we developed this idea that the Psalter, the book of Psalms, is actually the king's book. All right, so this guy named Bruce Waltke, who's one of my favorite Old Testament scholars, says this. The human subject in the Psalms is the king, and we shall never enter fully into rich devotional material until we realize this. All right, so we've got a little bit of work that we need to do here. We need to understand that the scriptures in their totality are what we call a meta-narrative, all right? And what a meta-narrative is a big story. So from Genesis all the way through to Revelation, there is actually just one story that is being told. And that is the story of God's redemption through Jesus Christ. Actually, Pastor Steve and I have been looking at a curriculum that was suggested to us. It's called The Story of God. It's for discipleship groups, and we're strongly considering twisting all of our discipleship groups' arms to do this curriculum in the fall because it goes through what is the story of God. Not just like a piece, but what is the whole narrative from start to finish. And when we come to the book of Psalms and we have that in mind, that there is a big story that is being told, what we ultimately see is first this. The king in the book of Psalms is immediately representative of the people, right? And so what the king is doing is kind of on behalf of Israel, the nation that he is ruling. And then what we also see is the king is representative of Jesus. Okay, and so what happens is, while not every psalm is what we call a messianic psalm, which is kind of prophetically, really directly pointing to Jesus, like say Psalm 22, it's like, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus actually quotes that on the cross. While not every song is a messianic psalm, every psalm is weaving the big story together, reminding us that Scripture is telling us the story of God's redemption through his anointed king. Are you tracking with me? The Bible is a story about God's redemption through Jesus. Now here's the problem with this, especially in charismatic circles, which we are proudly a part of. We have at some point, I think, strategically forgotten this reality. We've forgotten that every text is about Jesus. We've forgotten that the Bible is telling us about God's redemption through Jesus. And so we start treating the Bible like this kind of cut up piece of examples of how you should and you shouldn't live your life, right? So I'm not like old yet, but I'm not real young anymore. I've been in pastoral ministry 15 years. So again, it's like not a real long time, but I'm no longer a rookie, right? So I've been around long enough to have seen, I have been to conference after conference, camp after camp. I've heard sermon after sermon, and then sung song after stupid song, right? Like this one just drives me crazy. I go to our conferences. Pastor Steve and I were at a conference recently. We sat and we had like a 3-song set at the beginning of the service, and all 3 of these songs, it's like, I don't think one of them mentioned Jesus. Pretty much everyone was like, I'm going to be okay. It's just self-focused. And I walk out of that, I'm like, is it just me? Like, am I crazy, or is this actually happening? And a couple of pastor buddies were walking behind us, and they were like, man, that was like, there was no Jesus there. I was like, thank you, God, I'm not going crazy, right? But it drives me absolutely bonkers that we somehow preach the Bible, we somehow sing songs, we somehow do all of these things in a Christless manner. And if you are listening to preachers or you are singing songs that don't remember that all of what Scripture is about is Jesus and redemption, can I just press to you that maybe you need to find other preachers to listen to and other songs to sing? Because while there are absolutely lessons, like individual applications that we can take from every part of Scripture, that's secondary to seeing the big picture. God is redeeming his people to himself through his King, Jesus Christ. And so when we come to the Psalms, we are reminded and we are extolled to have that big picture in our minds. And then track with me for this, because there's a very real kind of application that we could take from this. We oftentimes have this mentality that says, hey, you need to invite Jesus into your story, right? Like your problems, your reality, you need to invite Jesus into your story. Can I suggest to you that what the Scriptures are actually inviting us to do is not invite Jesus into our story, but they are inviting us into Jesus' story. It's not so much about you as it is about him. And this is going to begin to flip our mentality that says that, man, God thinks I'm really great and he's got my back, to Jesus is at work. How do I get on board with that? And what we see when we kind of begin to embrace that type of a reality is, man, God is at work all over the place, and I am just a part of his story. And I think that transforms how we approach our problems. I think that transforms how we approach our day-to-day life. It begins to give us a more biblical perspective on reality. And then here's the beautiful thing. The only reason that we could step into God's story is because he has stepped into humanity's story. And he has stepped into humanity's story in a way that tells us that he knows what it is to suffer. You come back to the Psalms, you go, man, God's king knows hardship. God's king knows what it is to suffer. So track with me. There's different kinds of psalms. You have psalms of praise. You have psalms of ascent. You have this type of psalm, which is a psalm of lamentation or petition. Type of psalm that cries out to God and says, God, things are not going well right now. Where are you? You go back to our friend Bruce Waltke, who I mentioned earlier. He says there's a few elements in psalms of lament. First is a direct address. So how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Then there's a complaint. How long will you hide your face? How long must I take counsel in my soul? And then there's a petition that says, God, would you answer me? Then there's words of confidence, again, Psalm 13, but I have trusted in your steadfast love, and there is a promise to praise. I will sing to the Lord. But what's interesting when we look at these lament type of songs is we know that even God's anointed king had reason to lament and to petition God. So you back up a little bit and you go, man, even the highest seat in Israel, God's theocratic nation, his chosen people under the old covenant, the highest seat in that context, the king had moments of, God, where are you? Why are you hiding? What are you doing? God, if you don't act, I may actually die. My enemies are going to prevail. And so you sit there and you go, man, if the king can have those kinds of moments, then what does that mean for the people? They can read along with the king and they go, man, we can join in lament and we can join in petition. If even the king, the scriptures tell us, is Yahweh, the Lord's son, his kind of anointed and appointed individual. If even the king can sit back and go, God, where are you? So can we. And then when you tie that back into this big story that we are talking about, we begin to see pictures of God's anointed king, Jesus, the divine king who will embrace the reality of suffering, beginning to mediate for his people. Right? Jesus was not foreign to suffering. Jesus was not foreign to lament. You read on the cross, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Isaiah prophesies about him and calls him a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Are you tracking with what this is getting at? Jesus is God's anointed king who knows what hardship and suffering are, and he shows us how to deal with them. So we sit back and we go, man, Jesus is not foreign to suffering. Jesus is not foreign to hardship. In fact, the entire theme of the scriptures is that God's king will know what it means to lament and to suffer. It's one of the reasons that things like the prosperity gospel are so freaking dumb. Am I allowed to say that? Don't tell me if I'm not, right? The scriptures in their entirety invite us deep into the reality of lament and petition. Why? Because they know that things will go wrong. They're setting us up for how do I respond to hardship, not, hey, if you trust Jesus, everything will be fine. And you will always have enough money, you will always be healthy, and you can grow a sweet, slick-back mullet and sign multi-million-dollar book deals, right? The point of the gospel is not that Jesus here and now removes all of your problems. The point of the gospel is that here and now Jesus enters into them with you and knows what suffering is. So when you face hardship, you're not sitting there going, God doesn't know anything about what this is. You could sit there and go, man, Jesus has also suffered. I can turn to him. And then track with me, because what I don't want you to hear when I say that is that things will never change for you, that Jesus has nothing to offer here and now in this life. That's not what I'm saying, right? Jesus absolutely does have answers for your problems. Jesus can and will, and at times we absolutely believe, heal people physically of their ailments. But there is a tension that we live in that says the kingdom of heaven is here and now, and it is still yet and coming. And so while at times we will see the pictures of that kingdom breaking through, where Jesus will supernaturally step in and fix our problems. While at times we see that, we realize that there is also a reality that the world is still broken and sinful, and death and sickness are a part of reality. And so we live with hope, knowing that Jesus can transform our here and now, knowing that Jesus meets us here and now in the midst of our suffering, and knowing that there will come a day when Jesus will return and he will set things right. I love you read the book of Revelation towards the end. He throws sin and death into the lake of fire. There is no more sin. There is no more death. Jesus conquers. Jesus reigns. Can we say, come quickly, Jesus? This is so bad. I probably shouldn't admit this. Last night, I was watching Amazon Prime, and it's just like all of a sudden I noticed that I cannot watch something on Amazon Prime without a lot of like commercials again, right? And I texted my wife. I'm like, the golden age of streaming is over. It's gone. And as I'm going through this, I'm starting to think, I'm like, man, there's so many things that is indicative of that are actually real problems in our world, like not just first world, me sitting and not wanting to watch commercial problems. But like our world is in for it right now, right? Like you look around at the things that are happening, it's like, I don't know that I want to live on this planet anymore the way that it is. And I text my wife, I'm like, honestly, I just feel in a deep way right now in my soul that I just want Jesus to come and set things right. And we live in this kind of tension that says, I know that I'll suffer here and now. I know that things aren't always the way that they ought to be, but we have a hope and that stirs a desire which we live here and now, looking to the future where Jesus will set things right. We take all of that and we begin to come back to this psalm and say, when life is hard, we then need to know how to lament and we need to know how to petition. The fact that we see this kind of formula in the scriptures should be instructive for us. So what we could say is, when you are facing hardship, follow the lead of the king. Man, it is okay, listen to me. It is okay to take your problems to God. It's okay to say, Lord, I don't understand what you're doing right now. Like, I want you to hear me on this, friends. It's actually okay, if we're paying attention to this psalm, to publicly complain. Like, I'm not saying like make everything into a big deal, but I'm saying that there are times where it's okay to say, I don't know what is going on. I'm not sure why God is doing what he's doing right now. But man, we are so conditioned in a Western world to not do that, right? Like, we meet with people, we shake each other's hands, like, how's it going today? And the answer is always, I'm good. I'm good. We don't even know what to do with people who have a different answer than I'm good, right? But man, you know there are people who will walk through these doors, you will shake their hand and say, how is it going today? And their answer might be, well, the doctor just gave me a diagnosis, I've got less than 2 years to live. Or maybe there's somebody who walks through those doors and their answer is, my wife and I just had another miscarriage and this is getting really hard. But somehow, because we are so conditioned that we can't complain, that we can't like voice our pain and our sorrow, we're just like, I'm good. We don't even know what to do when we say, how's it going? And someone says, man, I'm not doing well today. I got bad news from the doctor. I have this struggle going on in my life. Our response is like, well, I did not expect that, right? We don't even know how to follow that. It's like, well, I'll be praying for you. I'm going to go get a coffee, right? Like, we just don't know how to handle that kind of reality very well. And yet the Apostle Paul wrote and said, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Can I suggest to you that we need to do some work on our paradigm of everything's okay? It is okay, based on this psalm, to cry out to God, to hear and to answer, both privately and corporately. We don't do that glibly, but we do it with confidence and with praise. Sometimes with tears streaming down our face, and God, I don't know why you're doing what you're doing. I'm not doing okay, but I am confident that you are working all things together for your purposes. And even though I can't see it right now, for my good as well, I trust you. I will worship you in all things. I took an Old Testament theology course this past spring, and when we went through the Psalms, we spent a little bit of time on the Psalms of lament. And my prof really tried to press to us this idea of like, what does it mean to praise when things aren't going well? And I think pretty much all of us as students were like, well, we've had these experiences where things weren't going well, and then we turned and we were like, Jesus, I'll still worship you. But she began to press and she said, do you think that perhaps at times the actual action and expression of lamentation and of mourning is in of itself an act of praise? Because we're coming to God and saying, I don't have answers. I don't know why this is happening. God, I'm struggling right now. Like, is that in itself an act of praise to just turn to him? I think she was on to something. I think, man, my own story over the last few years, I could resonate with that. Many of you know, shortly after my wife and I showed up in Dawson Creek, we had some, just serious family things kind of go sideways for us. I honestly don't know if I'm still, or if I am yet ready to publicly talk about that where the internet is a reality, but I can tell you this, that it was brutal. And I'm talking in the context of not just like, oh, there was like a little bit of time where that happened, and then we had, I'm talking that this literally did not come to an end until about 3 months ago, right? And I remember at that point, there was some stuff that stirred up with this. It just was like causing me anxiety, causing me stress, like legitimately things that were a big deal. And it all kind of came to a point in this one event. And again, I'm sorry, I don't know that I want to go into detail on it. But it came to a point, it's like, okay, this is over. And I remember taking a breath and going, man, like I need to recover from this a little bit. I'm glad that there's like some closure here. And I remember praying, God, could you just give me like a couple years here where there's nothing that is going to put me in the hospital at 6 a.m. in the morning because I've been up all night with anxiety attacks, right? And I prayed that prayer, and within 2 weeks, I got a phone call that my dad had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma. If you know anything about cancer, it's not the type that you beat. And it was just like, okay, what do I do in this moment where I'm already like carrying a little bit of something that has been really traumatic, and I'm a millennial, so I don't know how to deal with traumatic, right? How do I deal with this type of reality that is now here and it is threatening to actually break me? And if you've been around, you'll notice I kind of like quietly disappeared for a couple of weeks. I sat down with our board of directors. They're like, we want you to just take a couple weeks to get out of here so that you can clear your head. Pastor Steve, bless his heart, jumped in and covered things for me. But man, I just in those moments was like, if I could use the term, was probably on the edge of either burnout or some sort of moral trauma. And I know for those of you who maybe not buy into that kind of thing, that sounds dramatic, and you're like, maybe you're just being a millennial. I don't think I am. But man, it was hard. And I come to the Psalms like this one in a season where I'm still like, man, I don't have the answers on why life has been the way it has for me over the last couple of years. I don't necessarily have the answer for my dad, who, by the way, I told him I was going to share this morning. Please pray for him. I know so many of you have. He's a good Pentecostal, like, ask people to pray for me because he believes Jesus can heal him, right? But I don't have the answer why sometimes God does heal people and why sometimes he doesn't. Like, hypothetically, if you want to get into the theological world, I could talk about the already, the not yet, sometimes, but I don't have like a definitive answer in every case why God chooses sometimes to do one thing and sometimes to do another. But when I come to these kinds of Psalms, I just think that all of a sudden those of us who know what suffering is, which if we're honest is most of us, are called to a deeper well of faith that says, man, I know that things will at times go sideways. That's not going to shock me because it's like been told in the scriptures. Lament is a real part of the scripture. So when things go sideways, I am not shocked. I mourn, I cry, I struggle, but I'm not surprised. And in the midst of that, I'm able to look at the example of King Jesus and say, okay, if he knows what it's like to suffer far more than I ever have, and to trust, to even on a cross say, God, forgive the people who've harmed me. To even in the Garden of Gethsemane say, God, not my will, but yours be done. All of a sudden, those moments of darkness and those moments of struggle take on a different context. And in that, and in the midst of difficulty, I'm able to have confidence and trust in the God who is at work now and who I know will one day set things right. And so, friends, sometimes my praise is stained a little bit with sorrow. Sometimes my trust is stained or is couched a little bit in the context of like, God, I trust you, but I meant help me to trust you. Because if I'm honest, I'm struggling right now. My praise is couched in a context of, God, would you be that king that delivers? Would you be that king that leads? Would you be that king that sets the example? And would you help me to cling to you? And so this morning, as we jump back into the Psalms through this summer, can I invite you, if you are in a season where things are difficult, to know that you're in good company. If you're in a season where you are struggling, to know that God has not abandoned you. And to know that you can call out to God's anointed King, that you can lean on him, and that it is okay to struggle. That it is okay at times to say, God, where are you? And to know in all of that he is trustworthy and that he is worthy of our praise and our worship. Can we stand together this morning? So God, we recognize things do not always go the way that we want them to go. But we also recognize, Jesus, that you have walked the road of suffering before us, and that you are in the process of, and one